Okay, great. So might as well go ahead and get started, especially if I can help you focus on what you need to do today. Um, Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why we have this filled out. I'm a big believer in having it done before you show clients any properties, but as we all know, it doesn't always happen like that. So maybe I'll
Right,
give them like, one or two freebies just to find out their intentions. And
right.
it's really the intentional buyers that, after I say meet them for the first time, I'll go through this with them in person, say at a coffee shop or whatever, or even on a Zoom conversation, so that they're comfortable with what they're signing. But I like having it in front of me to kind of explain our relationship.
Right.
I always let them know that the purpose of this documentation, I like to call it a loyalty agreement. I think that sounds a little bit better. But the document, a lot of these documents are about their rights as a buyer in the state of Virginia, as well as we're setting them up for success by, giving them the right expectations. And obviously, before I kind of dive into this, I have a conversation about what's going on in our current market. So jumping into this, residential exclusive right to represent, I let them know that this, as well as another document, defines our relationship, the client's relationship with me as a sub-agent of our brokerage, and that they're really entering into a legal relationship with the brokerage. So always ask for their legal names and make sure that they're filled out here from the beginning, just so you never have to go back and add an addendum for that. So buyer representations, this has changed a little bit over the last couple of years, but I really like how it's written now because it also touches on open houses. So this is where we have the conversation about whether or not they have signed any documents with another agent. And if you get the feeling that maybe they're not being truthful, I just kind of let them know like, hey, depending on which one was signed first, you could potentially owe a commission to an agent that you didn't actually end up going through the transaction with. So it's just better to be honest about all of this from the get-go.
Right.
And if they have gone to see open houses with another agent specifically, did that agent put in an offer for them? Number one, and number two, did they sign a buyer brokerage with that agent? A lot of times people have signed things and they just don't know what it is. So having this in front of them might also remind them that they signed something. As
Right.
far as the term, again, I think that comes down to the intention of the buyer, and trusting your intuition about that. I usually do 6 months. If somebody's just kind of in the looky-loo stage or has a long time until their lease is up, I'll go ahead and do it for a year. Um, and then, of course, the broker at the sole discretion may assign one or more associates of the broker to assist the buyer in the acquisition. It's rare that that happens, but I like that verbiage because that's where I usually say like, hey, life happens. And if something happens and a home comes up that you need to see within the next day, and God forbid, like I'm in the hospital or I'm with a family member, I will reach out to my broker and have another sub-agent of my firm show you the property. I think it's important to say that so that they're not, hitting that button on Zillow to get anybody to show them the property. Broker's responsibilities, I usually like to put this in front of them, and I call this the adulting conversation and the adulting paperwork. This is what to expect from my brokerage, and this is what to expect from me as a representative of my brokerage, specifically presenting in a timely manner all written offers and counteroffers to and from the buyer, disclosing to the buyer all material facts that we know or can find out upon them, wanting to know for. Accounting for in a timely manner all money and property received in which buyer may or has or may have interest. Again, coming back to that conversation of adulting timelines. And this is where I bring up, hey, there's going to be a lot of times during the transaction where myself and your lender are going to send you documentation that you need to sign in a timely fashion. And I actually like to scare them a little bit and say, all documents must be signed in a 12-hour window. I say that so that hopefully it's done in 24 hours.
I like that.
So, and then obviously they can have any of this document. Actually, it says it a little bit farther along that if there's anything that they don't understand and they feel like the sub-agent or brokerage hasn't explained it, they can have an attorney explain things to them. But I want them to sit here and actually read all of this information. And then I also point out that the broker will maintain all confidentiality of personal and financial information. And at that point, I remind them that this is basically a representation, meaning I am now responsible for representing their interests over mine. And people really like to hear that. Buyer's responsibilities, continuing this adulting conversation. They get scared here where it says B, pay the broker directly and indirectly, but I bleed that into number 7, the compensation conversation. But again, a reminder that it's a loyalty agreement. So not only am I remaining loyal to you and putting your needs, both fiduciary and representative, in front of my own, I need you to sign this to show that you are loyal to me and I am the only agent that you are working with. And that's where I bring that up. And then being available to view properties, I'll stop here and have a full-on conversation about their schedule. Just get that conversation out of the way, so that you have a general idea. Are you looking at night? Are you looking at weekends? Are you looking during the day? Can they leave work at lunch? Like, get into the nitty-gritty of it. And then I just document all of that. I'm always taking notes while I do this and throw this into my database for their information to remind myself, because we talk to so many people, it's easy to forget. I will bring up that when people say to me, they can only go on weekends or during the week after 5:30 or 6 o'clock or what have you because of their schedules. It's never a great idea. And again, this is about setting expectations in the beginning. It is never a good idea to view a home in the dark. If somebody pushes, sure, I might do it. But typically you just really can't fully see the home and what it looks like. So I'll tell them, you know what, drive by it at night, check out the neighborhood, but we do need to see the home during the day. Obviously purpose is what it is. Compensation, it's a good idea to get in front of this conversation as it bleeds down here to the 3%, especially with what people are reading in the news these days. I'm not sure, Jen, how up to date you are with kind of what's been happening with the compensation conversation, but I don't like to wait until to have that conversation. Obviously, we never want to say that the buyer doesn't pay us. The way that I explain it is the listing agent has an agreement with their seller that was negotiated between them, and it really has nothing to do with us. And whatever that compensation is to the listing agent, typically they're going to split that between their broker and my broker, who will then pay me a percentage, but that money is coming from the proceeds of the sale of the house. I think it's really important to verbalize it that way, so the buyer does understand that, in a sense, if they sit down and do the math, they are contributing to the compensation and the commission of both sides of the transaction. You never want to get like halfway under contract and have that buyer say to you, hey, I need you to kick back whatever. This is also a good place where you can bring up, you know, really can't do that unless you're licensed. But get ahead of the compensation and commission conversation before you even go to view houses, just so they feel comfortable with it. I will tell them that typically what's negotiated in our market is 6% from the seller to the listing agent's broker, and then that's split in half and I'm paid by my broker. And that's what we have here, the broker fee segment. Do you feel comfortable with that conversation?
I do, yes.
Okay. And then of course the admin conversation, I don't get too much into it. I just explain this is an administrative fee that goes to my brokerage for my help and support, but also specifically, we're held responsible.
You're breaking up a little bit. Are you there?
Storage.
You broke up. You broke up on that last part. How do you explain the administrative fee?
Hold on, it's telling me internet connection is unstable.
You're not there.
Administrative help and support. Oh no. I think it's the internet here that's the problem.
Okay, but you just let them know that that's an administrative fee.
It goes towards my brokerage for my help, as well as for the storage fee, because we are legally held responsible as a firm to hold all documents for a minimum of 3 years.
Right. Okay.
Did you hear that?
I heard some of it and I already knew some of it, but I just, you know, that's a hard one because that fee keeps rising. So it's up to 450, which is something that has changed since I wrote a buyer broker. So,
Sure, sure. What I
um,
typically will tell them, because I've been at other firms and I've come back here, I've seen this fee as high as $700.
yeah, it's getting crazy. I mean,
It is, but I do understand why it's necessary. There's a lot that goes into running a firm, and there's a lot that the firm takes care of for us, you know, our E&O insurance, all kinds of things that they do for us just to turn on the lights, as well as to have our administrative support. I think that's a big part of this. I'll even go,
yeah,
I'm
I
sorry.
totally understand. I just, sometimes it's hard to justify that to clients who already feel like, they're paying everything
Absolutely.
else. So, I mean, it's just any kind of tricks or
I
verbiage that would help is good.
I find that it's an easier conversation with buyers, especially when you're having it in the commission conversation. And usually what I just say is I say what I said, and then I say, this is part of that 3.5% to 4% that are your closing costs. This is not something that you pay separately. And
Okay.
usually they feel a little bit better about it. This is something that's part of the money that you're going to come to the closing table with at settlement. It's not something that you're directly writing a check out to my firm.
Gotcha. Right.
And the reality is that it is there's a cost of doing business. Side
Sure.
note, people will ask you to break down what closing costs are. I always turn them back to the title and lending company, but at the end of the day, closing cost is the cost of doing business with a lender for the most part, as
Right.
well as all of your title work. But the large part of it is the cost of getting that loan.
Well,
And,
I
and
do have
this,
another question about the administrative fee. I know a couple of years ago, it's been a couple of years, the VA buyer would say, oh, well, I won't be held responsible for that fee. Like there's
correct.
certain, okay.
So
Is that,
that is still the case. We cannot charge this to a VA buyer.
okay.
Okay, we can charge it to a VA seller, but I personally have a tendency to, depending on the situation, offer to pay it out of my commission.
You do.
I do, but I wait until we're a little bit farther into the transaction
Okay.
to offer it up as a gift. So, say, for example, last year I helped one family buy and sell 3 times. Well,
Oh,
three
wow.
transactions from one
Nice.
family. It was a sell and a buy from the parents, and then a buy for the son and daughter-in-law. So I charged it on the first. I did not charge it on the second and the third. I took it out of my commission,
Nice.
and I was perfectly comfortable doing that. Um, it to them, it absolutely felt like a gift.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's almost $500.
Exactly, exactly. And to be honest with you, with the son, since it was his first time home purchase and he was the one who put me in touch with his parents in the first place, I also at the closing table let them know that I purchased for them a home warranty.
Oh, that's really nice too. Those are
Yeah,
upwards of $600 now as well. So
they
nice.
are. They are. Luckily, this was a condo, so it wasn't too bad. It was like 475. But yeah, I mean, their cost of doing business that rest on the seller and the buyers. There's also a cost of doing business for us.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
some of that is the relationship business. So that's where I bring that into play. If I'm building what's going to potentially be a bigger relationship in the future, for me, the 450 is worth it.
Right.
I wasn't counting on it in the first place because you never count on anything until the day of settlement, right?
Till the chickens are walking around the yard.
Exactly. All right. So coming down here, any obligation occurred under this agreement on the part of the buyer to pay the broker's fee shall survive. And that's where we come back to, well, we're going to come down to, or actually, hold on. I think I went past it here. This section here, the A, B, and C, within 180 days after expiration of this agreement, if the buyer ends up purchasing a property that you've shown them, or previously put in an offer for, this is where I let them know you'd still be responsible for paying a commission towards my broker. Hopefully that's enough to scare them not to do that.
Right.
As far as disclose dual representation, we don't do that at our firm, but I still explain to people what it means. because I really want them to understand why we won't do it. So the example I give them is if it turns out that they're interested in a house that I currently have on the market, I have already signed a listing agreement with that seller. So at that point, we would use designated representation, which is down here. You can see the paragraph here on designated representation. So I let them know that I would put them in the trusted hands of another agent under my brokerage. And then at that time, I wouldn't really be able to communicate with them as buyers. And I also would only be able to communicate with the agent on the other side about this transaction, but not about our clients. I'm hands down in agreement that we don't do dual agency. I have had clients who have been interested in a property that was a FSBO or that I could have potentially double-ended both sides. And then what we come down to here, where's the section? There's a section here that talks about administrative duties where we can represent the buyer, come to a FSBO or somebody that wants to sell their property and offer for the seller to pay either 3% for me to represent the buyer, to bring them a buyer. What I like to do is say, I will accept 4% from you. That extra 1% is administrative duties, which is basically just help with paperwork. But what they need to hear is that, and the buyer needs to hear this, that I wouldn't be able to negotiate on behalf of the seller, only on behalf of the buyer. So this is where we talk about whether or not they are a licensed agent. Easy enough conversation. Usually we know that before we're even sitting down to talk to them.
Right.
And it's pretty rare that any licensed agent would be looking for representation if they work in Virginia. So equal opportunity, obviously, this is important, and I'll read it out loud because they need to know that it's been said and that we don't breeze over this. Recordings within the property, I kind of have fun with this, but I do like to make it a serious conversation. Yes, the seller should absolutely disclose when they're recording both visual and audio. We can't always guarantee that they're going to, so it is safer for us to assume. Always assume that you are being taped both visually and audio. Very specifically, everybody has a Ring camera. And the first thing that you want to do when you leave a property is say, oh my goodness, did you see such and such in the house? Or anything pro or con. People with a Ring camera can literally be sitting there listening to the conversation and then can create a bias about why they don't want to sell you the property. So it's really just best get down to the end of the driveway, be super quiet about it, walk down the street, get in the car, whatever. And you'll have to kind of I feel like I need to remind my clients a lot because they get caught up in excited utterances. You know what I mean? When they see something in the house, and we want to avoid that at all costs. So electronic signatures, obviously we all want everybody to be comfortable with electronic signatures. I will sit down at this point and bring out my iPad and show them what Brokerment looks like and what it's going to look like when they're signing a document. Miscellaneous, obviously, please feel free to put this in front of an attorney if there's something that you don't agree with or you need more clarification. But also, this is where we explain this is a legally binding document that can only be changed by writing an agreement with both parties. Plain and simple. Side note, I believe strongly that unless I'm under contract, right? So if we're just in the showing stage and somebody decides they don't want to work with me, I personally don't hold them to work with me. I would never want somebody to work with me who's not interested. That just, you know, can create so many problems down the line, as well as your I can't talk, reputation.
Right.
Filling this out is important, obviously. And then we come down to our next document. So the next two documents, when I'm sitting in front of them, I basically put it in front of them and ask them to read through it. And I tell them that these are their rights as a buyer in the state of Virginia. There are some that I will highlight. I'll take the opportunity to talk about the property owners associations, condo associations, and what that all means. what's important to state here is that there's nothing in those documentations that are negotiable. It's the one part of the contract that is not negotiable. I'll come down to, obviously, the mold, come back up. I think that the mold conversation is important because of where we live. The moisture and termite inspectors are not mold experts, and you can very easily go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a mold test. Just be comfortable in explaining to them that there is going to be a level of mold that's in all houses. You just don't want to see it a certain percentage different than the level of mold that's outside the house, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Lead warning, obviously, this is where I say you're going to get, this 20-page lead pamphlet if you're interested in purchasing a house that was built before in 78 or earlier. And then I usually just kind of joke with them about it and state, just have your pets and your children not lick the walls. It becomes a major issue when you're going to do renovations. Try to make this as light as possible. EIFS, simply synthetic stucco. And all I'll say to them about this part is that if you're interested in putting in an offer on a property that is stucco, we're going to do an additional inspection. And these days, that's running between $1,800 and $2,600 just for the inspection.
What?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
The last one I did was 1,800, but there were two before that were 26. Yep.
So most people really just opt out of that, right?
They do. It's not as much of an issue if the property is obviously a certain amount of mileage away from any kind of water, but where we live, that's just not a high probability.
Right.
I find that conversation is more applicable in other parts of the state. We have less stucco property here.
Yeah, that's true.
But again, this comes down to setting the expectation. This is an expectation conversation, so that you don't end up at a stucco house and say, oh, by the way, because of what this property is built with, we need to do an additional inspection. Let them know ahead of time so it's in their head when they're searching online for properties. So we come down to financing and insurance. This is going to be conversations that they're going to have with the lender. I love to stay in my own lane. Flood hazard areas. So I let them know that every time that they send me a property that they're interested in seeing, I give them bullet points on what they need to know about them before we go see the property. And I check the flood map beforehand. I also am very, very clear that even if a property that they're intending to purchase is not in a flood zone, I still want them to get the FEMA base insurance, because 30% of all homes that are damaged by flood where we live are not in a flood zone. I don't know if you heard that, but that's something that we kind of need to make a reality. I can't tell you how many times I've started with buyers and they've said, I don't want to live in a flood zone. Well, then you might not want to live in Hampton Roads because it's all a flood zone.
Right.
Home warranty insurance. A lot of times when I'm going to meet a buyer for the first time, I'll have a couple pamphlets for different home warranty companies with me. I keep in my car. I try to get updated ones whenever I can. Get that conversation going in the beginning, because even if I can't get it from the seller, we still want them to have it, obviously, unless all of the appliances are brand new. Lenders and owners title insurance. Again, this is something that I do say I stay in my lane. The title company will explain to you the purpose of this, but in short, you don't want a relative of a previous owner coming back and laying claim to the property, and this is how it protects you. Aircraft noise, everybody in our area is pretty comfortable with what that means. It's more of a conversation that we need to have with people who are moving here. We have jets, they are loud, plain and simple. If you are sensitive to it, then we want to look outside of certain areas. Occupancy permits, we really only need to worry about if we're dealing with the new builds. Building permits as well. This is something they need to look into. If they plan on doing any work to a property, they need to do their due diligence to find out what they can and cannot do. Transportation and roadways, obviously, we have the conversation of, I can't necessarily say you're so close to this and so close to that, or, hey, I heard that they're building a ramp or something like that. We need to be super careful about that. That also has to do with the school conversation. We have to point them in the direction to do their own due diligence. And one of the things that I'll even highlight in person before seeing somebody is, you see at the bottom of the section, it does have a link. Always highlight the links because this is where they can do their due diligence.
Nice.
Just have them come back and read through this. Mechanics liens, this is also something that Federal Insurance can help with. But I make it clear that the reason that we are using title companies and specifically the attorneys that we use is because they're making sure that we're getting a property free and clear of any liens or title issues, but that a lien can be placed against the property within 90 days of the time of the work being done. This is important, and what I let them know also, this is where I like to show a little bit of our worth as buyers agents and how we're representing our clients best, our clients' needs ahead of our own is, we put forth a PICRA, which is a list of repairs, and then we're asking for those invoices of the repairs being done. What I make very clear is that I do not accept an invoice that doesn't say paid. And I turn over all of that in a folder to my clients at closing. So they have all the proof that any work that was done to the property, be it HVAC, electrical, plumbing, everything has been paid. We will not accept anything other than an invoice that states that. Coming down to Megan's Law, everybody pretty much knows where they can look, but go ahead and take a look. Power of attorney, if we think that we're going to need one, if somebody's in the military and is on a boat somewhere else in the world, we're going to jump on getting that taken care of before we go out to view. And that's where we involve Jones Walker and Lake. Polybutylene, Quest Piping, I give them the short story about how this was used in the 80s and beginning of 90s. We don't see a whole lot of it left. If it doesn't show an existing problem, typically it won't. But buying a house with these type of pipes does actually affect your homeowner's insurance. So this is something that we technically can find out at the home inspection. But the truth is, if you know what you're looking for, you can see it like under the sinks, the grate piping, the fixtures. Have the conversation before you end up in a house with one. I remember when I was a new agent and I didn't, and I really hadn't done my due diligence about the whole problem with them. And I was in a house when my actual buyer was the one who called them out. I want to be able to be the expert when we're in the property.
Right.
School registering, I talked about that. Property inspection. I am not a fan of waiving a home inspection at all for any reason. So we're going to convince our buyers that having a home inspection is the best way to find out the health and safety of the property. We're not going to turn around and ask for them to necessarily fix everything that's on that list, especially if they're concerned with cosmetic issues. But anything that is health and safety related, we definitely want to make sure that we're asking them to repair. Septic tank, just know before you go and find out if the property needs a waiver. And tell them to check out the link here. Hang on one quick second.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm easily distracted. I have them read through the settlement service provider, and at this time, I will also show them that later we're going to take a look at the paperwork for Jones Walker and Lake, where it gives the breakdown of our settlement fees. Smoke detection, obviously, square footage. Typically, we're taking somebody's word for it, but we can look at the tax records. But the tax records, as we all know, don't always measure up.
Right.
Survey disclosure. I will typically, if I know that my client is super interested in their property lines, specifically for the purpose of either putting in a pool or putting in a fence, more importantly, we just reach out to the listing agent, find out if they actually do have a survey. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And if they need one, we're going to put it into our offer that were going to ask for one. These days, I'm finding that they're running between 600 and 1,000. I don't know what you're finding, but I do push people who are interested in putting up a fence. Let's go ahead and get it done during the transaction so that you're not waiting and trying to schedule it on your own afterwards. Third-party contract approval. This is more of something that we have to deal with, obviously, on the listing side, but this is when you might be interested in a property that is a foreclosure or a short sale. We're going to need the bank's approval on any offers we put in, and this is where I let them know, hey, if you're interested in a property like that, you know, we might have to buy as is. I still want you to spend the money on a home inspection. As well as this can take potentially 3 to 5 months, possibly even longer. And it's one of those small things that is outside of our control as the buyer's agent. Again, setting that expectation so that they're not coming back to us in 3 months when they're under contract on a short sale. Like, hey, what's taking so long? I'm freaking out because I'm in a lease. If you're in a lease and you're going to be homeless and you can't go month to month, we're not going to make an offer on a short sale.
Right.
Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act, I kind of joke about these as saying, not only will you get these disclosures, but you'll also get a document that says, this is a disclosure that you've gotten the disclosures, and we have a little laugh because we're going to go through them anyway. Right.
Right.
And then I state, so coming down to E, this is something that I do focus on for buyers, because you're out looking and they come to you and say, hey, can you see if anybody passed away in this house, or can you tell if this, or can you tell if that? And this is where they have the conversation that it is a buyer beware state. There are states like Florida and I think Texas and California that are seller disclosure, where seller has to disclose if there was ever flood, fire, etc. In the state of Virginia, it falls entirely on the buyer. The only thing that a seller needs to disclose legally is whether or not the house was ever used to manufacture methamphetamines. And then we all have a laugh and we move on. All right, coming down here, water frontage and rights. These are typically things that we can find on a survey, but we can also kind of dig through tax records and find this information as well. Wood destroying insect infestation and moisture inspection. This is coming back to our moisture and termite. For the most part, I have the buyer pay for it, and I order it for them. It depends on I'll tell the buyer during this conversation, hey, it depends on the property. There are certain companies that I really like to use if it has a crawl space, because I know that they're really good at like really getting under there and finding out what's going on under the property. There are other companies that I use that might be a little bit less expensive if the property is on slab. And then I bring up something in here that's not on any of the documentation, but I think is incredibly important. If we're looking at homes on slab, in addition to the home inspection and the moisture and termite, I'm going to recommend, I can't force anybody, but I'm going to advise that my clients get a sewer scope. There are some home inspection companies that have what needs to be done to do it, or if you have a relationship with a plumber who has the camera and materials to do a sewer scope. But there are still homes in our area, either Quest or really old cast iron. And when I say really old, I'm only talking about the 80s, but they're corroding. And say you had families in there that had pets and was constantly washing materials in the washing machine with pet hair. That's one of the fastest ways to get a blockage, because they're already corroded, so they hold on to that. I really push for that pretty much up until like a build date of, I would say, like 98, just as an extra protection. And then I tell them about my 2 horrible stories where I had clients who chose not to do it. And within a month of moving in, not only did we have a problem with the pipes that needed to be fixed all the way out to the street, but they had to jackhammer their floors. And then my clients were on the hook for replacing the flooring. And we're talking $15,000 to $20,000 each. So
because I think the insurance company only supplies that pipe. They don't do the floor.
You are on the hook for replacing your flooring. So
what's the cost for something like that recently?
I did 2 this month. I did them with Lind Home Inspections. Cindy does them. It takes her half an hour and it does run $275. Now I know that there are agents at this firm, specifically Chrissy Hagler, I think, who has a
Uh-huh.
relationship with a plumber who does it for much less. But I did it for, I told my clients about it. They were absolutely on board to have this done, especially when I tell them scary stories. And both houses we were looking at had gorgeous flooring. And the idea of having to rip that up and then come out of pocket to put down something was enough to say, okay, I'm going to spend the 275 for peace of mind rather than $20,000 later.
Yeah, it's worth it for
Yeah,
sure.
it's absolutely worth it. I have had other plumbers come out and it was between 175 and 225. The problem is, I'll be honest with you, the scheduling, right? So obviously we want it to happen at the same time that they're doing a home inspection.
Right.
Sometimes scheduling, you might get in touch with a plumber who's like, hey, I'm super busy. I can't come out for 3 weeks. Well, we're outside of all contingencies. We can make it a contingency, but it's just easier to try to get it into that home inspection contingency.
Definitely.
But my whole point of wanting to do these conversations is I don't want people to shy away from the hard expectation conversation. Get it all out there beforehand so that they know and accept their responsibility as a buyer. All right, coming down. So this one is very similar to the previous one. And at the end of the day, when I'm meeting somebody in person, I print out this paperwork. I give it to them to take home. I ask them to review what we talked about and to finish reading everything. And then I check on them in a couple of hours and say, if you're comfortable with everything that I've given you and we've reviewed, I will go ahead and send this to you electronically. But for them to have a physical copy of it, I think is really important. I think a lot of agents are getting away from that and everybody just thinks it's okay to have it in your email box. Take the time to still kind of do things a little bit of the old way, because I feel like it puts more onus on the buyer. Again, part of that adulting conversation. You are responsible for understanding what we're doing here.
Right.
So this one I don't necessarily go through, but I will, like I said, have them take it with them. There are a lot of things that are similar to the last one that we went through. There are some additional things here. This one's a lot longer. So that is that one. And then we get into our disclosures. So for cybersecurity, this is another opportunity that I take to actually scare people. I know that sounds really weird. You'd understand if you know me. But there's a story. It didn't happen to me, but it happened to an agent friend of mine where the night before closing, her clients received an email that literally was copy and paste all the title. It had the title company's information. The only difference that was discovered later is there was an A that was a different font. And they were, it was wiring instructions for $90,000 for the down payment. And they sent it and it was gone.
Oh no.
Yep. That's a scary enough story that when I tell people that, I then follow it up with, anytime you are giving wiring instructions or you are being asked for money from anybody, I don't care if it looks like the lender, I don't care if it looks like the title company, I don't care if it's a phone call, you call me for everything. And again, this is a way that we show our representation, right? We show our value, we show our worth by looking out for our clients' best interests, and looking out for their money is a very, very important way that we can do that.
The most important way.
Exactly, exactly. So any contact, anything about money, you call me immediately. I also let them know that within 2 days of being under contract, if we're using Jones Walker and Lake, they are going to receive that email that states 2 different ways that they can pay their earnest money deposit. If they're not comfortable with what they're reading, they should let me know. I also like to tell Jones Walker and Lake, please copy me on communication. And a lot of times they'll clear that with the client. I let the client know ahead of time that I want to be copied on all information so that nothing gets missed like this. And then that's what the EMD is. I take a moment here to kind of discuss the first 2 days of being under contract. I also will have, I have a little trifold document that's like a map of the transaction. I don't know if you've done any of those on Canva,
I have not.
but they're super helpful to just have.
Okay.
What's that?
I said I would like to, but I
Either
don't.
Canva or, okay, I'll get your email and I'll text you when I have.
Perfect.
You can use the free Canva ones that are, now I'm not Canva, but Christy Hall does classes on them. And
Okay.
she's a great resource if you need help with that. But also there's what's called Breakthrough Broker, and they have a free or a paid version. I think the paid version right now is only 110 a year. And it actually, like, you can put in what you're looking for and it drops in your logo and your picture for you so that you're not trying
Oh,
to.
that's neat.
Yeah, that's one that I have found that's really worthwhile. And they have a plethora of the steps of the transaction. So I'll have that with me. And with this open in front of me, we talk about the first 2 days of the transaction and their responsibilities as far as the EMD. I also explained to them that, like, if we are ratified on January 3rd is day 0, and they have until the end of business day, essentially, January 5th, to take care of the EMD. And we talk about it here, not when we're putting in an offer, but here, are you prepared to pay that? Would you like to do it by check? You can drop it off at this location in Lynn Haven. If you want to do it by debit card, those instructions will come to you via email from the principal. And I also have the conversation now, you're not going to pay that on a credit card. That is considered financing and that's not acceptable. Or they can do a wire transfer. But it's always good to have that conversation now, so you know when you're writing up the contract and one of the, when you're going over terms of whatever a purchase agreement you're going to put forth, you're not trying to figure out then, hey, how are you going to pay this? I'll also discuss with them at this point how much they should expect. I'll even go so far as to tell people, look, nationally, what's usually negotiated is 1% of the purchase price. But because we're so heavily influenced by the military and the military buyers, especially those first-time VA buyers, usually 500 is okay. But what we're doing here is we're trying to show the sellers how much skin in the game we have. So I usually recommend between 1,000 and 2,000. And I explain to them that it's money towards their closing costs. The more that they put down as an EMD, the less they have to bring to the closing table. So that's my conversation about that. I usually end up sitting on that page for quite a while and going through all of that. It states that we are not an escrow agency. We do not hold funds. I can't even hold a check for a client, as everything these days is tied up in legalities. And that's why they're going to pay the settlement company directly. They will be, the settlement company's purpose is to put together all the numbers that have to do with the transaction. So they're the ones who hold this. And then at this time, I also let them know, hey, you might go ahead and pay $2,000 and say we don't get that property. Sure, if you do want to get it back, it unfortunately can take up to 45 days. It usually takes much less. Or if we're still shopping for a home, leave it there. Just let it sit with the title company. But we let them know also that we have a relationship with Jones Walker and Lake. We have to disclose that. And I will say, you do not have to use Jones Walker and Lake. We will determine that before we go under contract, but this is a disclosure saying we have a relationship with them. And then what I love is that part of our paperwork is the actual breakdown of costs. Boom, there it is. And again, I'm giving them a physical copy of all of this. So for the engineers and the lawyers that like to take everything apart, they can sit down and look at this. And then I'll actually give them like 1 or 2 links to other title companies. They can go online and they can take a look at the breakdown of their costs as well. What I like to say is typically we do see that this costs between 150 and 200 more than if you're using just a settlement company without an attorney. But here's the reason why I love to use Jones Walker and Lake, because if we're under transaction, under escrow, and the other side is not performing. They're not holding their end of the deal. They're doing something that's outside the contract. They're in breach of contract. If we're using a settlement company, I then need to call the settlement company and they have to bring in their attorney, and they're going to usually pay between $375 and $450. Whereas we are already with attorneys. They're not litigating attorneys, but I can pick up the phone and I can call Austin and I can say, here's the situation. And he bangs out a letter, no problem. Sometimes there
Right.
is a cost for it, but it's much less. So instead of using a settlement company that has an attorney on retainer, let's just go ahead and use the attorneys, and it's more protection all around. Again, a way that I feel we can show our worth. And then we have our lead pamphlet, which everybody signs from the beginning, regardless of whether or not they tell you that they don't want a home that's older than 1978. Just get them to sign it. And again, just tell them to tell their kids, don't lick the walls. I do think it's a good idea to put together, I try to redo them like once every 6 months, documentation that shows the steps of the transaction. So after I've gone through all this paperwork, then I bring back out my pamphlet. We've only gone through the first 2 days of the transaction. So I'll take an additional 10 or 15 minutes to explain to them what I think is important that people want to know is not just what the lender told them they need to bring to the closing table, but what is expected to come out of your pocket during the transaction, right? So this is where we kind of review what I've told them, but now they're looking at a map and they can see it. And I might even write down kind of ranges of what something will cost. And I always say that the prices are based on the square footage of the house. Obviously, a home inspection for a home that's 1,500 square feet or less is going to be much cheaper than 2,000 or more. So set up that expectation. I will also sometimes have pamphlets or information for home inspection companies. I will tell them that I do have trusted home inspection companies that I like to use based on the property's condition as we see it when I go through. For example, if they don't want to do the sewer scope, the closest thing would be to use, I think they're called Safe House. I've used them in the past. I don't know if you have. They're great. They will check the sewer line, not necessarily under the house, but from the street to the house, which is, in most cases, is decent enough. But they also bring 4 inspectors, and they just like spread out like bees. And usually it's done a little bit quicker. If I see that a property is in pretty good condition and we're not anticipating any issues. So just as long as you have your preferred home inspectors, but at the end of the day, once we go under contract, I have a document that I've written up that has a list of my preferred everything. There's a minimum of 3 companies in every category, right? So 3 electricians, 3 plumbers, 3 HVAC specialists, 3 roofing contractors, 3 home inspection companies, 3 home warranty companies, and then I have my own home insurance contacts. I know that the lender is always going to make a recommendation. I want the client to understand that they have to do their due diligence as adults purchasing a property. So I help them in every single way that I possibly can. And I've even been told I handhold a bit much, but you still want to make sure that they have every piece of information going into it. The document that I have with my vendors, I update a lot because once somebody has done me dirty, they're out. And I let my clients know this. Again, we are showing them our value. We're showing them how much work goes into what we do by representing them. We don't want to leave them with the impression that we're pushing papers, because that's not what we're doing. And I also say to them, a lot of people will look at what's on TV and think that all we do is show houses. But the reality is the majority of what our hard work starts when we get under contract. That's when I go into overdrive to represent your best interests, to represent your concerns, and to negotiate on your behalf as best I can. And then at that point, I will close this all up. I will hand them the folder with the physical documents. And then I like to have fun looking at some homes online, because I want them to see right away what they can get in certain neighborhoods. We really have to kind of control the expectation of what they think they can buy. A lot of people will come to you and say, I want a single family home, 4-bedroom, 2.5 bathroom for 250. Well, that's not where we live. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So set that expectation in the beginning. You can wait for them to figure it out, but then you're actually just making your timeline and their timeline a little bit longer. Set that expectation. And then usually in the days before I meet up with them or very quickly afterwards, they have my preferred list of lenders. That's a separate document because I'm also updating that constantly. And on that, I have their direct cell phone numbers, and I'll send that to them as soon as we're finished meeting if they haven't, and say, okay, you reach out. These are their direct cell numbers. This number.
You're breaking up on me again. Are you there? Shoot. Hello? You just cut out. Hush, bud.
Conversations, and then
There.
after,
You're back. Shoot. You know what? This might be my internet connection.
internet
Yeah.
connection issues. How about now?
I don't, yeah, I can hear you now. I was gonna say, I don't know if it's mine or yours. Okay. It was yours. Well, I do thank you. I guess you'll see this on the recorded version, but I do thank you for your tips and tricks and insight and everything today. And have a great day. I appreciate you.